I was thinking about this, and I think what I'm saying here is right. And of course, I think what I'm saying here is right. Otherwise, I wouldn't be saying it. Um, a lot of people would disagree with me on this, and I suppose within a decade or 2 decades, one of us would be right, one of us would be wrong. But I really only need to be right once in order to be right in totality as an absolute. I've made the point before that I think it's us and not us. Now, whatever I think is somewhat secondary to whatever the hell the government is doing right now in regards to this very specific issue. There's a report that was due June 1, but supposedly, at the very least by the end of this month. And that is supposed to be by the various intelligence services that are supposed to say, all right, here is what we know about UFOs. Now, of course, all of this started based on the New York Times, based on the release of videos, based on the Pentagon saying, yes, those videos are UFOs, and yes, those videos were from us. And then the Pentagon released their own videos. You've had the New York Times, you've had the Washington Post, you've had CNN, you've had Lou Elizondo going all over the place, you had D&I Ratcliffe, you've had Woolsey, you've had Brennan talking about UFOs, you've had Congress members that's been briefed, shown classified information and videos, come out saying, oh my God, yes, there's a there to it. You had Navy pilots, fighter pilots, come out showing their face saying, this is what I saw, this is what I encountered, this is what took place. There's radio data, and there's all sorts of videos at this point. The videos is just one aspect of it. It's the totality of information. It's all of the people that are basically raising this to a certain degree of hysteria that have access to classified data. And so Congress has to respond. The military, the Navy, responds. You have the Army working with To the Stars Academy, organization that is explicitly looking out for the interests of UFOs. You have Navy changing their protocols. You have this report. You have the UAP task force. You had ATIP. Now, Elizondo said when he left, ATIP was still going on. But either way, you basically have all of this stuff that is taking place seemingly around basically the same time. This has created all sorts of hysteria around the UFO issue. So Congress puts out a report. The New York Times gets a leak. And the New York Times, U.S. finds no evidence of alien technology and flying objects, but can't rule it out either. Now, is that true? Is that true? I am going to take the position that the report that is going to come out is going to be what I'm calling logical disclosure or overt confirmation. Now, what I mean by that is it's not so much that they're going to say, hey, they're aliens, nor are they going to bring out an alien disc or alien dead body and say, here you are, talk to you later. That's not going to happen. What's important is the key term logic. The document that the New York Times has put out has basically made the point, something very clear and very definitive. It's not like Project Blue Book. Project Blue Book explicitly sought to say it's all swamp gas. That's not what this report is. This report is not saying it's not nothing. It is saying there's a there. It is saying that the avionics, that the capabilities of the craft that we're encountering, we don't understand what all of them are, which is the reason why they can't rule out aliens. Meaning, if the things that they were seeing were basically explainable and basically bogus and dodgy and parallax, or the pilots were all incompetent and the equipment was all glitchy and everybody was either lying or just misperceiving over and over again for the course of X number of years, all of this, or coincidental actions that are taking place. The report acknowledges some of these things we can't identify. We accept that a percentage will be hypersonic testing and black budget projects of other countries. Of course it would be, because we accept that we will most likely be doing the same thing. We had the B-2 bomber, we had the stealth bomber. All of these things were basically black budget projects that we knew nothing about, despite the fact that these things were developed and have been sitting around for like 20 years or more. So I don't have this, I don't think it's insane for somebody to have a perspective that we may have tech that's 20 or 30 years ahead of what we already know, and considering that knowledge is exponentially expands upon itself, what looked like exotic tech 20 years ago may seem radically different than what we may think of it today. If we came upon this notion of electrogravitics, well, the craft that we would create wouldn't need wings. That craft would be able to go through space and water. That craft would deflect radar in a particular way. The design of the craft would need the typical avionics that we typically use in regards to the physics. So the craft would be different, and it could be something that we could make. And it's not necessarily dramatic in the sense that we could come up with some kind of tech that could do or replicate some kind of functionality for that, even though we may not necessarily be able to replicate all of the capabilities that we have basically described. Catch is, the report was never going to come out and out special access projects. In fact, we don't even know if the people who are writing the report has access to those special access projects or even know that those special access projects exist. By the same token, overt confirmation is something different. Regardless of what's true, there's what's true, and then there's what's true, or what the government says is true. Those are two different things sometimes. But whether they're two different things or not is somewhat secondary to the fact that what is taking place is overt confirmation. They say in the report very clearly, these are not us, meaning US. It is not special technology. It is not, something that we have in our inventory. We know that much as a flat fact. That's what the report is saying. It's a flat fact. It's not any of ours. All right. Russia, China, aliens. Overt. I didn't say what's true. I said what the government is saying. Overt. Russia, China, aliens. We spend $1 trillion a year on our military, give or take. United States, $778 billion. China spends $252 billion a year. We spend as much as the next, all of these 9 countries or more. We increased our military budget by like $80 billion. Russia, with all of its technical acumen and capabilities and everything else, spends an astonishing $61.7 billion. Underwhelming amount. What that means is that the amount that we increased our military budget by was more than what Russia spent on its entire military budget. From the standpoint of China, we are 3 times as much on our military budget as they spend on theirs. That's not to say that China or Russia couldn't necessarily have workers and people doing technological research and everything else that is not overtly expensive. So the U.S. may end up paying more for less. That has to be taken into consideration. Meaning spending $1 trillion on a military budget, well, half of that money is basically personnel and paying for people and everything else, jobs program. The other half is where you get into the money being spent on technology and everything else. But if you have vendors that are associated with the government, is it possible that the vendors are overcharging the U.S.? Yes. Is it likely? Probably. So from the standpoint of saying, okay, how much are they spending and everything else? So I do take it with a grain of salt. However, I'm just making the very basic point. We spend 3 and 4 times more than China. And again, we increase our military budget by more than the entirety of the Russian military budget. Logically speaking, overtly speaking, what the government report is saying deeply within the context of it, meaning if you logically think about what's being said in the report, it's getting across a perspective. It's getting across a point of view to the American public and to the public of the world. China says it doesn't know what it is. Russia has also its issues. Many of the countries around the world, it's not just the United States, Canada, the UK, France, all of these countries have been encountering stuff. Brazil, South America, all of these countries have been encountering stuff. Many of those countries think it's us. And in many respects, I probably agree with them. But the point that I'm trying to make here is from an overt and logical standpoint, you would have to believe that we've been radically leapfrogged in our technology for this argument to work, that it is Russia or China. You also have to explain stuff that took place like in 2000 and 1950, etc. The report is analyzing 120 items. I don't know if this is one of them.
End of the conversation. It wasn't more than, within a few minutes, I'd say, maybe a half hour later. He calls back, and this time he's very frightened. I can tell by the tone of his voice. He's very shook up, and said, "Sir, there's a glowing red object hovering right outside the front gate, and I'll show you where the gate might be located. But where he's located, he's got a large picture window of the front gate, and he said, I'm looking at it right now. It's a glowing red object. I've got all the men out here with their weapons drawn." And of course, he was all shook up while he was telling me this. He was very excited. I didn't know what to make of it, but he wanted me to give him instructions or orders, tell him what to do.
This is Captain Robert Salas, I believe. Yeah, Salas. He was in charge of a nuclear weapons facility. I think there were like 10 nuclear weapons. What he's describing to you, this was the thing that I mentioned to Mick West. This took place back in the 50s or the 60s. Whereas, meaning, you got to explain this. You can't take data off the table when you're trying to figure out what's going on and you're looking at the totality of evidence and information that's available. You would have to believe he's lying. You would have to believe he's incompetent. Wes mentioned that the report that came out of this didn't mention UFOs. Why would it mention UFOs? Do you really believe that a report in the 60s would say that a UFO turned off the nuclear facilities? Especially a report that you would get your hands on or have access to. He's recounting multiple people saw UFOs outside of the military installation. As the UFO stood there, and those guys were getting massively freaked the fuck out because it was close enough for them to be able to identify that it was a UFO, the nuclear weapons shut down. Now these things, he makes the point like how deep these things were in the ground and everything else, and that basically they just shut down. And apparently this wasn't even the first time that this took place. You have to explain this. Now you could say, oh, it was a weapons glitch. And it was a weapons glitch that took down each and every last one of those nuclear weapons, despite the fact that these things were apparently not entirely connected to one another. Meaning it was like a fail-safe, that if one went down, you still had the other ones that could launch. You have to explain that. I don't know if this is included in one of the reports. It should be included in the reports. But either way, again, it should be something that's explained. And I would imagine, I don't know some of the stuff that these guys are seeing from the standpoint of the classified materials, but when many of the Congress members saw this stuff, these Congress members were convinced, yes, we need to look further into this. The report itself, like I said, it's not going to say, oh my God, they're aliens. No, the report is going to basically eliminate certain items off the table of what it could be, leaving you with a logical choice of Russia, China, aliens. And you're stuck with another logical deduction of, we spend 3 times as much as our military and they leapfrogged us. You're also stuck with a certain logical deduction of, okay, if these guys are doing technology like this, then we should be able to see this in their society. And the fact that we don't also brings up a question of, okay, do they really have the capability to create devices and items that was far superior to our own military, despite the fact that we have all of these tech companies, that we have all of these aerospace companies, that we have been building this stuff for decades. Meaning the report, regardless of how bland it is, the fact that it takes items off the table, is leaving you with certain logical deductions that the report is overtly implying. China, Russia, aliens. And do you believe China and Russia has the capability of doing and producing technology that is doing things in a way that is radically superior to our own? That's what the report is basically presenting you with and is leaving you with. forcing further inquiry. This is what logical disclosure looks like. Or you could say a certain overt confirmation. And again, by overt, what I mean, and I'm putting those things in quotes, I just mean from the way that the government is talking about this and from the conclusions that the government is trying to leave you with. It's very interesting. The back and forth, the push and pull that's taking place in regards to this information and the way this information is being released. I have one more quick video on this about Sam Harris, because I think that adds another piece to the puzzle of what might be taking place. I think Stephen Bassett is actually more right on this than I think I was initially giving him credit for. I'm going to say like, I'm going to say share, I'm going to say subscribe. Thanks all.